All right, we are going to talk about one of the most, I think it's one of the coolest little next steps here, taking these ideas of some advanced chromatic harmony and just going a little bit further with it. I always sort of give a little bit of a warning here. We're going to learn about a type of chord called the Neapolitan chord today. And this is, I find it really fascinating, but the Neapolitan chord is, I don't even know how to describe it, but is the thing that when people don't know what the answer is, it seems like we always guess the Neapolitan chord. And so I'm hoping that from this video that you'll really take away the specifics of what the Neapolitan chord really is, and not fall into the very common trap of just guessing that anything that you don't recognize is the Neapolitan chord. I only bring it up because I find it fascinating. At this point and further, we learn about so many different kinds of harmonies and so many different ideas musically throughout these semesters of music theory. But the one that people just latch onto as their Hail Mary, I don't know what it is, I'm going to guess this, it always seems to be the Neapolitan chord. So I just love to bring that up because I think it's really a fascinating little insight into, the ways that we can confuse ourselves. Hold on here a second. I seem to have, I hid my PowerPoint from even myself. So anyway, here we go. Let's get into this. Let's explore what's going on with the Neapolitan chord. Fancy there. So this chord is really, really connected to the ideas of modal mixture that we've been dealing with recently, and in the way that we can say that it retains. This is a little complicated, but it's an altered chord, much like modal mixture chords are, that retain the same function as their diatonic partner. And by that, right, we mean we know that, like, in the modal mixture world, if I'm in G major and instead of a major 4 chord, C major, I use a C minor chord, it still acts like a C minor chord, or a 4 chord, I should say, wants to act, right? It's not changing its function. The diatonic partner, the 4 chord that we expect in the key, and the chromatic chord, the modally mixed minor 4, act the same way. They have the same function. That's going to be the same here with the Neapolitan chord. Even though it's going to have this crazy name, Neapolitan, it's not that different from these ideas of modal mixture where we're just changing a little bit about it. We're not drastically and dramatically altering the function of the chord, all right? So that's one of the ways that it's connected to modal mixture. There's a little bit more to it than that, as we'll see. But the other thing, and the thing that is really, really unique and specific about the Neapolitan chord, is that it's a triad built on the lowered 2nd scale degree. So what solfege syllable would that be? If it's not scale degree 2, it's scale degree flat 2. It's Ra, right? So that's really great. Everybody loves Ra. And so this should give you a little bit of a window into why this is not included in the concept of modal mixture, even though it's related, because in the minor scale or in parallel keys, there's no Ra, right? We can adjust La to Lay. We can mix Lay into the major scale, and that comes from the minor. We can even do it with Te or even May in some, the flat 7 or the flat 3. But the minor scale doesn't have the flat 2, doesn't have Ra in it. So that's sort of what makes the Neapolitan related but distinct, right? So it's built on the lowered 2nd scale degree, and we're going to see that it usually, most commonly, is used in first inversion. And so we'll sort of get into that in a second. But the Neapolitan, while it seems exotic and rare, it very much comes with a set of specific expected usages. We're going to explore some less typical uses that we find, but there is a really standard application of the Neapolitan chord that we're going to learn today. And this idea of it connecting in that diatonic partner way that retains the same function is that whether we're building our chord on the flat 2 or just the regular 2 chord, it's a predominant. It wants to lead to 5, right? 2, we know the 2 chord was put on this earth to get us to the 5 chord. The Neapolitan functions in the same exact way. It's funky, it's got this raw thing going on, but nothing fundamentally changes in terms of its function, which is really nice. So even though it's weird, even though it's, we're not calling it a 2 chord, because we're going to call it the Neapolitan, it feels very specific, it feels very different, very foreign from everything else we're talking about. It really is a predominant chord, just like 2, that wants to lead to 5. It is more frequent in minor keys. We'll see an example of that, sort of why in a little bit here. But the Neapolitan chord is used in both major and minor, but part of the reason it's a little bit more frequent in minor keys is that the only change that needs to happen is for us to bring Ra into the equation. So let's get an example here of looking at this Neapolitan 6th, right? And the reason we call it the Neapolitan 6, and you can see it's labeled there, N6, is because it's in first inversion. Some people get a little confused, and there's another chord that we're going to look at a bit down the line here that has the word 6th in the name, and it can mean different things. Some people think maybe sometimes it's on the 6th scale degree, right? When we did modal mixture, we said that it's the 6th scale degree that is the most commonly adjusted for modal mixture. That's not what we mean here with the Neapolitan. With the Neapolitan, it means it's a first inversion chord, right? The figured bass inversion symbol name is 6. So we would label this N6, and you can see in this example here, we're in the lovely key of B minor. Pretty sad key. I think B minor is for me, it feels pretty heavy. We've got this N6, so we're in our run of Roman numerals, which if you think back to Theory 1, seeing all these Roman numerals in music may have felt like a strange, sort of unexpected thing, but we've gradually gotten used to it. And now all of a sudden there's this letter, this N thing showing up. Who knows what's going on? But let's get a listen. I think you'll immediately be able to hear the unique sound, the unique color of the Neapolitan. But here we are in B minor. Right, and here's our little passage here. Right, so that Neapolitan chord, that N6, should really, really jump out at us, right? Everything's going normal, everything's looking good, and then all of a sudden, wow. It's really, I mean, I don't use this word lightly, but it's kind of sublime, I think. So just before we even get into it here, remember, the Neapolitan chord is built on solfege syllable Ra, the flat 2 scale degree. So here in B minor and B major, our second scale degree should be C sharp. And if we look into the key signature, we got C sharp, but here C natural, that flat 2. That's the root of this Neapolitan chord, right? And we can see that as predicted, or not predicted, but as discussed, it's a predominant chord. It wants to go to 5. And in fact, it really, even in the examples that we're going to see where we use it a little bit less perfectly, not perfectly, less typically. In some ways, they're more perfect because they're more exciting and beautiful. But it even when we use it in a funky way, most of the time it's still acting like a predominant in one way or another, right? So that's its function. And we can see that there's some pretty specific voice leading that goes into this. And that's why we talk about it's by far the most common to see it in first inversion because it allows this voice leading to take place. So the first thing is that it's in first inversion, and so the bass can just go up in step from fa to sol, right? Just walking up, right in step, and that's really huge. That stepwise motion in the bass, fa to sol. Remember, if you listen to this without the soprano part, first of all, sopranos, I know that's a scary thought. You've lived your whole life worrying, what if somebody realized they don't need us to sing? I promise we need you. But if we listen with just the lower 3 parts, when I get to the Neapolitan chord here, you wouldn't know that there's this unique kind of crazy chromaticism happening there, right? So this fa to sol bass line showcases that we build this unique chromatic chord on a really solid foundation. So it's got nothing weird going on, fa to sol in the bass. The ra thing can happen in any other voice, but not the bass, because it needs to be in first inversion. And then the other piece to this part writing puzzle, that was pretty good, is the flat 2, ra, the C natural here. And we've got this awesome usage of a very rare interval, because we've got ra going down, C natural going downwards to A sharp, ra, ti, do, which is a diminished third. You know, I love every time that we have these really crazy intervals. I always think back to in Theory 1 when we do the interval worksheet, and there's these these augmented fourths and diminished sevenths and diminished thirds and, you know, augmented sixths. People are sort of always aghast. They say, why am I doing this? I'll never see these. But man, that diminished third, ra, ti, do, is really great. And I love the way it's just snaking around do, right? Half step above, half step below, right in the middle on do, right? And so these two elements, the stepwise motion in the bass, fa to sol, and ra to ti in one of the upper voices, that is absolutely the critical heart to the part writing for the Neapolitan sixth chord. That has to be there. And there's a lot of reasons why, but you know, the big thing to think about is we want to take care to use these interesting chromatic notes in a sort of careful, take care to use them in a careful way, but to use them in a very purposeful way. And we don't want to, oftentimes in music, we try to keep the weird notes away from other versions of that same note. And what I mean by that is we don't want to put the C natural here, which is the weird note, right? We would all agree, next to a C sharp, which is the normal note. It sounds better if you don't put the weird note next to the normal note. So instead, we have it go down to T, right? Melodically, that makes more sense. Ba-da-da, instead of going through this whole thing and having your melody be do, do, ra, re, do. Like, that's fine, but when you start doing that, ra, re, it just feels like it should keep going up, right? We don't like to put the funky note, the funky version of a note next to the normal version. It's like in movies, you know, when people time travel, right? Like in real life and in movies, when people time travel and there's those fun foibles of trying to keep the two versions of the same person away from each other because it would create a continuity error. Got to watch out for those, right? So having C natural and C sharp coexist is problematic for our really delicate space-time balance. This is a whole different class. We could go on this for a while, but so we want to keep ra moving downwards to T. That's really, really, really critical. Let's just look at a little bit of a longer example here. I'm not even going to take any time to talk about the first measure here, but you can just hear it sets the stage for us. Right, so the thing we want to point out here is the way we can use the Neapolitan along with our best friend in the world, the cadential 6/4. And the real great thing about this is that by putting that cadential 6/4 in between the Neapolitan and the full voicing of the cadential of the dominant, right, at the back end here of the cadential 6/4, is having do in the middle, right, so that here's the fourth of the 6/4 resolving down to the third, 4/3, right? It obscures the ra, ti, do. Without the cadential 6/4, right, it goes directly from ra, ti, do. But by having the cadential 6/4 in there, we get this slightly less noticeable ra, do, ti, do. Right? So it works really well with the cadential 6/4 especially if you're someone who is brought up in a household that doesn't accept diminished thirds. This is a nice way for you to explore the sound of the Neapolitan without really getting crazy. So anyway, those are some ideas with the Neapolitan. And again, it's that voice leading that is so critical. It's Ra going downwards to T that makes the biggest difference by far, making sure that everything is right where we want it to be. And I hope that you can really enjoy exploring this sound. But again, I have to warn you, just because you don't understand or you don't recognize something as we're analyzing something going from this point forward, that does not automatically mean it's the Neapolitan. The only time that it's the Neapolitan is when it's a triad built with the flat 2 scale degree as the root. So in any key, let's say you're in G major and you see a crazy chord, if the root of that chord isn't A flat, it's not the Neapolitan, right? Let's say you're in D flat major, great key. If you see a crazy chord, and there's a lot of flats in D flat, so you might think that every chord is crazy, but if you see a chord and the root of that chord isn't E double flat, it's not the Neapolitan, right? It's got to be built on the flat 2. You got to get that Ra in there. All right. Thanks, everybody.